Okay, so now I've already finished bringing in my scanned ink line and live tracing it into Illustrator. So I have an ink test here, EPS, which as soon as it renders is perfectly clean no matter how much I zoom in, right? And it's just the black lines. I can bring that into Photoshop and color behind it. I'm all set. But what if I didn't have an ink scan to live trace easily? What if I have just a refined kind of pencil sketch that's really messy? Can I do the same thing? Sometimes yes. So if I click on it and live trace it, and I'm going to use, similar, let's just use the same modes. So I'm going to use a preset that is line art. I'm going to stop it and say I only want fills, I don't want strokes, and I want it to ignore white. There we go. Now because it's ignoring white, I need to turn off my inked one behind. All right, so this is what it's going to do to pencil work. It's going to make it a whole lot shakier, right? And yet that's something. But live tracing it generally isn't the way to go. Now I can mess with all of these, the thresholds, let more and more in. But, and trust me, I've done this a lot, but whenever you kind of play with those thresholds for something to show up, then more and more cleanup work has to be done somewhere else. So unless you like that really, really shaky look, I don't recommend live tracing. So I actually recommend not doing any of that. I'm talking about how to make your line work in Illustrator. Yeah. So let's go back to where I just had pencil. I'm using Command Z. Okay. And instead of trying to live trace it, I'm going to leave it as a raster image. So to do that, I'm going to put it in its own layer, separate from my ink layer, right? Turn my ink layer off and lock it. And now I'm going to double click on that layer and I'm going to dim that image. It's just like putting tracing paper over my pencil. I'm going to dim the image to about 50% so that it's barely showing up, and then I'm going to lock it. And now I'm going to put a new layer on top of that. This will be my blob brush line work. I'm just labeling it that way so you know my preferred tool for digital inking. And this really is. It used to be that if you wanted this kind of interface to make vectors, you had to use Flash. And a lot of designers would use Flash, use the brush tools in Flash to make vector line work, even though that's not really what it's intended for, and then bring that vector line work into Illustrator. And then eventually Illustrator built it into its own capabilities. So you go to your brush tool, but you open the drawer and you go to the blob brush. That way it's not going to create a new separate path every time you pick up and put down your stylus. Then you can double click on the brush and you can set the size of your brush, and you want it to be pressure sensitive because we're using a tablet. But then this is the important thing. You want to put in a variation so that when you use your brush, you get that kind of range of size. If you push lightly, it's nice and thin. If you push a little bit harder, it gets thicker and thicker. Very nice. Then you can double click it and you can set it to be more smooth or more accurate, depending on what you're doing. For what I'm doing, I think I'm going to put it right in the middle. All right. If we had more expensive tablets, we could set the tilt and the bearing, but I'm using the same cheap tablet you guys are using, which doesn't have tilt or twirl sensitivity. All right, now, this is how you start inking. You simply make sure your stroke is turned off. Make sure your fill is a solid black. And then you start putting it down. Now it's going to look a little wonky at first, and that's because it waits until you let go until it smooths it for you. And so mostly I'm just trying to get into this kind of zen place where I fill it out. And I start thin. And I try to complete my path. Right? And really, these are the exact same skills it takes to ink in person. There's no difference. Now, that blob brush, what's nice is that if I need to come in and thicken something, it will automatically add it to that same path.
What's the screen capture command?
It is Command-Shift-4 to do a screen grab on a Mac. So you can see that the blob brush gave me a lot of nice variety in here, but right at the edges where I start and stop, it might not look so great. And that's really common. That's true of using an ink brush or an ink pen as well in real life. So I'm just going to go in with my pencil tool and clean it up. And maybe even leave a little bit of that slight variation on the outside because it makes it more human looking. Right. So here you can see where my blob brush kind of merged together. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And if I want to, I can smooth that out. And for some reason, the pencil tool, it might just be an illusion of mine, but it seems to be more forgiving when it's working on top of a blob brush line than when it's on top of a live trace line. You see, I don't even have to go between two anchors, and it kind of knows that it's modifying. Okay, you can zoom in and out. I can take off image trace. I'm not using it. I can turn these off. Pathfinder, I always like to have available, but I can move that into tools here. Move a few of these things off. Move color off to the side, because I really need space for inking. So now I go back to my blob brush. And I just go through. Now if your lines are too thick, you have a few options. You can change your size. So now it's only able to get up to 5 points, which allows me to be a little bit more consistent. All right? Or you can actually change everything you've done and make it larger on the screen so that you have more point variation in your settings. Now here's the issue with it. So let's say I'm using the blob brush. I'm going around. Each time I have to lift up, it gives me a new transition point I might have to worry about. Sometimes I'm pushing harder. Sometimes I'm barely pushing at all. Right? And it will smooth it out for me. Why I use the blob brush is that it immediately makes it all one path. You know, it's not starting and stopping it. So that makes it easy to correct with the pencil tool. And so you can get very accurate, very nice illustrations that are a lot smoother than you can do by hand, no matter how good of an inker you are. This gives you more accuracy, but it takes time and patience and a lot of tweaking. And with complicated designs with a lot of lines, like this one is starting to have, it would take me a while to go through everything. But that's how you do it. Let me see. Let me finish off with at least the letter forms, because maybe those will be useful to me later when we start playing with text. Now, because they're fills, I don't need to complete any paths. Remember, the inside and the outside of these are individual. That got a little messy there around the tight corners. And so that's an area where it would go better if I set it to be more accurate rather than smooth. Because if it's more accurate, then it will plot more anchors as I go, and it won't shortcut these curves as much. So if you notice that it's oversimplifying, then set it to be a little bit more accurate. And you can do really complex line work this way. This could have inking in it. This could have shading in it. And I recommend the Blob brush for all of that. So there's water. And then we have the vomit in here. You are not required to put text with your spot illustration until assignment 8. And I decided for assignment 8, I'm going to design the show text for our Earth Day exhibit. So I'm going to design the text that just says angry elementals. That could go with this as a poster, but could also work for the whole show. Because the whole point of learning these skills is to have that kind of versatility. Now, sometimes your ink line will go a little bit off of your sketch and you decide whether you want it to or not. It's not a big deal to me. And if you want an illustration that's not at all hand-drawn and instead is using all shapes and technical tools, well then hopefully you know how to do that in Illustrator using the shape tools. The most important thing I want you to know is how you can use the pencil tool to smooth and edit things and correct mistakes, whether they were made with the Blob brush tool or whether they were made just by live tracing. And again, in the YouTube page, I do have the full demo of a full spot character illustration done, inked with just the Blob brush tool over a pencil sketch. But here I think I'll just stop with this text because I might play with that separately a little later on. And the advantages of Illustrator, because everything is its own, as long as I select both the inside and outside path, I can rotate. I can rotate and even scale this to match my pencil more closely if I wanted to. All right. So just reviewing what we went over with the logo design project, how to use the pencil tool to clean up your vector. But the difference is it's your spot illustration. It's only clean if you want it to be. It can be very effective to have something really edgy and different for your line work. The only requirement is that you have line work. Oh, then I need the apostrophe at the end here. There's something just very satisfying about cleaning it up with the pencil tool. Look at that beautiful little raindrop apostrophe. Okay, so this is what I have inked with the Blob brush. And I just have to finish refining it, smoothing it, bringing it together. The inside and the outside of the lines being separate allows it to be more hand-done and individual. And this is even how some type designers work. Working first on the inside and then on the